The text message arrived at 11:47 on a Tuesday night, just as I finished transferring $4,000 to my parents' joint account. My father Richard's words glowed on my phone screen like hot coals burning through my chest. I disown you. Talk to my lawyer. 28 years of sacrifice of being the family's financial backbone, of working 16-hour days to support the people who raised me, crumbled in a single text message. My hands trembled as I stared at those 8 devastating words, feeling the weight of nearly $300,000 in support over the past 5 years dissolving into nothing. I typed back one word that would change everything. Okay. The irony wasn't lost on me that I received my father's disowning message while sitting in my corner office at Meridian Investment Group, surrounded by financial reports that proved my worth to everyone except the people who mattered most. The city lights of downtown Chicago stretched below my 23rd floor window, but all I could see was the reflection of a man who had given everything to his family and somehow ended up with nothing. I had always been the responsible one. While other kids played video games and went to movies, I worked 3 jobs throughout college to graduate debt-free on a partial academic scholarship. My parents Richard and Patricia raised me with what they called traditional values, though their version of tradition seemed to involve expecting their oldest child to fund their retirement before he even turned 30. After graduating from Northwestern with my MBA in finance 5 years ago, I landed this position as a senior financial analyst. My starting salary of $85,000 felt like winning the lottery, especially coming from a family that had always struggled to make ends meet. The first thing I did was set up automatic monthly transfers to help my parents catch up on their mortgage payments and build some financial security. What started as temporary assistance became a permanent arrangement. Every month, $4,000 left my account like clockwork. Emergency home repairs, medical bills, property taxes, car maintenance insurance premiums, even groceries during tight months. I calculated that over 5 years, I had provided $280,000 in direct support, plus countless extras for holidays, birthdays, and unexpected expenses. My own life reflected these sacrifices in every corner. While my colleagues bought houses in Lincoln Park and drove luxury cars, I lived in a modest 1-bedroom apartment in Logan Square and drove a 2007 Honda Civic with 160,000 miles. Vacations were weekend trips to Wisconsin lakes, not European adventures. Dating remained casual because I couldn't afford the lifestyle most women my age expected. The real tension started 3 months ago when my younger sister Emma moved back home after losing another job. At 25, Emma had never held steady employment for more than 6 months. She drifted between retail positions, food service gigs, and brief stints as a personal assistant, always finding reasons why each workplace was toxic or didn't appreciate her creativity. What she didn't mention to our parents was her growing dependency on prescription painkillers that had evolved into something much more dangerous. I discovered Emma's addiction by accident when I stopped by the house to fix their broken garbage disposal. She was passed out on the living room couch at 3 p.m, surrounded by empty pill bottles and crumpled receipts from multiple pharmacies. When I confronted her privately, she became defensive and aggressive, claiming she was managing chronic pain, and that I wouldn't understand because I had never suffered like her. The breaking point came when I suggested during a family dinner that Emma needed professional help and job training to get her life on track. Richard's face flushed red with anger as he accused me of attacking a vulnerable family member and being too harsh on my sister. Patricia burst into tears, claiming I was trying to tear the family apart with my judgmental attitude. Their reaction shocked me. I had simply suggested rehab and career counseling, not exile or abandonment. But they treated my concern as betrayal, as if wanting Emma to become self-sufficient was somehow cruel or unrealistic. The situation escalated when I discovered Emma had been stealing from the emergency fund I kept in a fireproof safe at my parents' house. $3,000 in cash money I had saved for genuine family crises vanished over 2 weeks while Emma claimed she was borrowing it for temporary expenses. When pressed for details, she admitted to buying drugs but insisted it was medicine and that I was controlling the family with money. That accusation stung because it revealed how they really saw my support, not as love or sacrifice, but as control and manipulation. Richard and Patricia sided completely with Emma, calling me heartless and selfish for wanting accountability. They accused me of abandoning family in crisis when I threatened to reduce financial support unless Emma got help. The final argument happened 3 weeks before the disowning text. I had driven to their house after work to discuss setting boundaries around my financial assistance. Instead of gratitude or understanding, I faced a coordinated attack. Richard stood in their living room pointing his finger at me like I was a stranger who had invaded his home. "You think your money gives you the right to control our lives?" he shouted. "Emma is going through a difficult time, and instead of supporting her, you want to ship her off to some facility where they'll fill her head with lies about her family." Patricia nodded along, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Cole, you've changed. Success has made you cold. The son I raised would never abandon his sister when she needs him most." Emma sat on the couch, arms crossed, smirking, as my parents defended her. She had orchestrated this perfectly, painting herself as the victim and me as the villain. The manipulation was so smooth, so complete that I almost questioned my own sanity. But the real shock came when I checked my credit report the next morning. My excellent credit score, built through years of responsible financial management, had been damaged by a new credit card I had never applied for. The account showed a balance of $15,000, all spent in the past 6 months. When I called the credit card company, they confirmed that someone had used my social security number and forged my signature on the application. The billing address was my parents' house. My hands shook as I dialed my parents' number. The credit card statement spread across my desk, like evidence of a crime I never committed. When Patricia answered, her voice carried that same wounded tone she had perfected over the years, the one that made me feel guilty for existing. "Cole, sweetheart, I'm so glad you called. Your father and I have been praying you'd come to your senses about Emma." "Mom, we need to talk about the credit card, the one opened in my name." The silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. Finally, she spoke in a whisper. "How did you find out about that?" "How did I find out you committed credit card fraud using my identity? The real question is how you thought you'd get away with it." "Cole, please listen. We had no choice. Emma needed medical treatment and you weren't giving us enough to cover everything. The insurance wouldn't pay for the kind of help she really needs." Richard's voice boomed in the background as he grabbed the phone. "You want to talk about fraud? How about the fraud of a son who spies on his parents and accuses them of crimes for trying to help their daughter? Dad, you forged my signature. You used my social security number. Debt collectors have been calling my workplace because of your spending spree." "Spending spree?" His voice rose to a roar. "Everything we bought was for this family, for Emma's recovery, for maintaining the home that will someday be yours anyway. You're acting like we stole from a stranger." The conversation deteriorated from there, with Richard accusing me of abandoning family values, and Patricia crying that I was destroying their trust by attacking them financially. They positioned themselves as victims of my suspicion rather than perpetrators of actual fraud. I needed to see the situation with my own eyes. Saturday morning, I drove to my childhood home in Naperville, preparing for a conversation that would either restore our relationship or end it forever. What I found in their driveway stopped me cold. A brand new Lexus GX 460 SUV sat where Patricia's old Honda Accord used to park. The sticker price on that vehicle was at least $60,000. In the backyard, contractors were installing an elaborate patio set with matching outdoor furniture that looked like it belonged at a luxury resort. A hot tub dominated the corner of the yard, its jets running as workers made final electrical connections. Emma emerged from the house wearing a designer outfit I recognized from Nordstrom's window display, complete with jewelry that sparkled in the afternoon sunlight. She looked healthier than I had seen her in months, but not in the way someone recovering from addiction typically appears. She looked like someone who had been shopping. "Cole," she called out with false cheerfulness. "What a surprise. Come see what Mom and Dad did with the backyard." "Isn't it amazing?" I walked through the house in stunned silence. My old bedroom, where I had studied for countless hours to earn scholarships and maintain my grades, had been converted into what Patricia proudly called a wellness room. Expensive exercise equipment filled the space: a Peloton bike, a complete weight set, yoga mats, and meditation cushions arranged around essential oil diffusers. "This is where Emma focuses on her natural healing journey," Patricia explained, her voice full of pride. "We realized that traditional addiction treatment is too harsh and judgmental. Emma is finding her own path to wellness through mindfulness and self-care." Emma nodded enthusiastically. "I've been doing yoga every morning and taking these amazing herbal supplements. I feel so much more centered now." The old Emma who needed those pills was just crying out for spiritual healing. The pieces clicked together with sickening clarity. My money, funneled through their fraudulent credit card, had funded a complete lifestyle upgrade disguised as Emma's recovery. They weren't addressing her addiction. They were enabling it with luxury amenities and new age nonsense. Richard joined us in the wellness room, his chest puffed out with satisfaction. "This is what real family support looks like, Cole." Instead of threatening to abandon Emma, we invested in her healing. We created an environment where she can thrive. "With my money," I said quietly. "Money you stole by forging my signature." "Stole?" Richard's face darkened. "You owe us, son. We raised you, fed you, clothed you, paid for your education until those scholarships kicked in. This isn't stealing. This is payback for 22 years of investment in your future." Patricia nodded vigorously. "We always planned to declare bankruptcy if things got too tight. The credit card debt would disappear, and you could handle the impact on your credit. You're young and successful. A little financial setback won't hurt someone with your resources." The casual way they discussed destroying my financial reputation while spending my money on hot tubs and designer clothes revealed the depth of their selfishness. They had planned this fraud from the beginning, viewing me not as their son, but as a financial resource to be exploited. Emma's next words delivered the final blow. "Actually, Cole, I have some exciting news to share. Marcus and I are engaged." She held up her left hand, showing off a diamond ring that probably cost more than my car. Marcus was her boyfriend of 4 months, a man I'd never met but heard concerning things about from mutual acquaintances. "We're planning a beautiful spring wedding, and we want you to help us with the down payment on our first house. Marcus found this amazing place in Schaumburg for $300,000. We figured you could cover the down payment since you've been so generous with everyone else in the family." Patricia clasped her hands together. "Isn't it wonderful? Emma is settling down with a good man who loves her. Marcus has been so supportive of her healing journey." Emma's engagement announcement felt like emotional blackmail wrapped in celebration. "And Cole, when we have children, we want them to know their uncle as someone who supported their parents' dreams. But if you can't be supportive of our new life together, well, we might have to limit contact to protect our future family from negative influences." Richard nodded approvingly. "That's right. If you want to be part of this grandchild's life, you need to step up now and show that you're committed to this family's happiness." They stood there expectantly, as if I should immediately agree to fund Emma's wedding and house down payment after discovering their fraud. The entitlement was breathtaking, but the emotional manipulation was masterful. They had cornered me, using my love for family and my desire to be part of future grandchildren's lives. As I drove home that evening, my mind reeled with the realization that my family viewed me as nothing more than an ATM with emotions they could exploit. The people who had raised me to value honesty and hard work were living off my labor while teaching my sister that manipulation and fraud were acceptable survival strategies. The final insult came the next morning when I discovered through a private investigator I had reluctantly hired that Marcus had a criminal record I suspected Emma was hiding from our parents. 2 drug-dealing arrests, 3 children with 2 different women he had abandoned, and pending charges for selling narcotics near an elementary school. Emma knew about his history, but had convinced our parents that he was a reformed man who deserved a second chance. The woman I had sacrificed my own romantic relationships to support was planning to marry a drug dealer using money stolen in my name. The parents I had honored by supporting them financially were willing to destroy my credit and reputation to fund their daughter's fantasy life with a criminal. That night I sat in my modest apartment calculating exactly how much I had given them over the years. The number was staggering, nearly $300,000 in direct support, plus lost investment opportunities that could have grown to $500,000 or more. I had funded their comfort while denying myself basic pleasures, and they repaid my sacrifice with fraud and emotional manipulation. The text message from my father arrived as I finished these calculations, and suddenly, his words made perfect sense. He didn't want to disown me. He wanted to disown his obligation to feel guilty about what they had done. By casting me as the villain and himself as the victim, he could justify continuing to spend my money while painting my objections as betrayal. But this time, they had underestimated their victim. I wasn't the desperate young man who had started supporting them 5 years ago. I was a successful financial analyst who understood exactly how to protect assets and pursue legal remedies. My reply of "okay" wasn't surrender. It was the first move in a chess game they didn't even know they were playing. The sleepless night following my father's text felt like the longest of my life. I sat at my kitchen table with bank statements spread across the surface, like pieces of a puzzle I was finally ready to solve. Each monthly transfer, every emergency payment, all the temporary assistance that had become permanent, told the story of a man who had confused enabling with loving. I traced the numbers with my finger, calculating not just what I had given them, but what my own life could have been. That $4,000 per month invested in a basic index fund over 5 years would have grown to nearly $270,000. Add the additional emergency payments, holiday gifts, and special occasion money, and I was looking at a retirement fund that could have been worth $400,000 by now. Instead, I was 28 years old, with $16,000 in savings and a credit score damaged by fraud committed by the people I trusted most. While my colleagues bought houses and started families, I had been funding my parents' lifestyle upgrade and my sister's drug addiction. The realization that I had been living below my means for their benefit while they lived above theirs hit me like a physical blow. I could have been dating seriously, maybe even married by now, if I hadn't been afraid to commit to someone. When my finances were stretched thin, I could have been living in a nice house instead of my cramped apartment, driving a reliable car instead of praying my Honda would start each morning. Monday morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years and drove to the law office of Rachel Brooks, an attorney specializing in financial crimes and family law. Her office in downtown Chicago looked exactly like I had hoped: professional, serious, and expensive enough to make my parents very uncomfortable. Rachel was a woman in her 40s with steel gray hair and the kind of direct gaze that suggested she had seen every variety of human selfishness. She listened to my story without interruption, occasionally taking notes on a legal pad. Cole: what your parents did constitutes identity theft, credit card fraud, and financial elder abuse, she said when I finished. The fact that they're your family doesn't provide legal protection for these crimes. financial elder abuse, but I'm not elderly. The term applies to any situation where someone uses emotional manipulation to exploit a family member's financial resources. Your parents have been systematically manipulating your emotions to extract money while providing nothing in return except guilt and obligation. She opened a thick file folder and pulled out several documents. I've handled cases like this before. Adult children who support their parents out of love and duty, only to discover they're being treated like personal banks rather than family members. Rachel explained that I had multiple legal options: criminal charges for the credit card fraud, civil suits for the stolen inheritance money I was about to learn about, and financial recovery through asset seizure if necessary. But first, she wanted to investigate the full scope of their deception. I'm going to request all financial records related to your family's assets and income. Something tells me the credit card fraud is just the tip of the iceberg. She was right. Within a week, Rachel's investigation uncovered a betrayal that went back to my 18th birthday. My maternal grandfather, who had died during my senior year of high school, had left me a $50,000 inheritance specifically designated for my college education and early adult expenses. My parents had never told me about the inheritance. Instead, they had forged my signature on the legal documents and used the money as a down payment on their current house. The property records showed clearly that my inheritance had provided the 20% down payment that allowed them to purchase their home in Naperville. Your parents had been living in a house partially paid for with your money for 10 years, Rachel explained. According to these documents, you technically own a percentage of their property. But the financial crimes didn't stop there. My college fund, which I had assumed was spent on my education, had actually been borrowed by my parents during my sophomore year and never repaid. They had taken $12,000 that was meant for my tuition and used it to pay off credit card debt from what appeared to be a gambling problem Richard had briefly developed. I'd worked 3 jobs during college, not because my family was too poor to help, but because my parents had stolen my education money to cover their own irresponsible spending. Every late night washing dishes, in the campus dining hall, every weekend working retail, while my classmates socialized, every sacrifice I had made was unnecessary. My family had the money. They simply chose to spend it on themselves instead of investing it in my future. The pattern is clear, Rachel said, reviewing bank records that painted a picture of systematic financial abuse. Your parents view you as a resource to be exploited, rather than a son to be supported. They've been stealing from you for over 10 years. That afternoon, my phone buzzed with a group text message that felt like the final insult. Emma had sent photos of an elaborate baby nursery setup with expensive furniture, a professional crib set, and designer decorations. The accompanying message read, "Thanks in advance for making our dreams come true. We know you'll do the right thing for family. Wire transfer details attached. Need $25,000 by Friday." The audacity was breathtaking. They expected me to fund Emma's baby preparations while she was engaged to a drug dealer, using money they had stolen from me through credit card fraud. The text message included actual wire transfer instructions, as if my compliance was guaranteed. But Rachel's investigation had revealed the most shocking detail yet. Through court records and private investigator reports, we discovered that Marcus had been arrested again just 3 days earlier for selling fentanyl near Roosevelt Elementary School. He was currently in Cook County Jail on $50,000 bail, and Emma was desperately trying to raise money for his release. The baby furniture photos weren't preparation for a happy family life. They were props in an elaborate manipulation designed to extract enough money to bail out her drug dealer fiancé. Emma was planning to use my guilt about potentially abandoning my future niece or nephew to fund the legal defense of a man who sold poison to children. When I confronted Emma about Marcus's arrest through a carefully worded text message, her response revealed the depth of her deception. She admitted that she knew about his criminal activities but claimed he was trying to change and deserved support from people who love him. More shocking, she confessed that the pregnancy might not even be real, calling it motivation for the family to come together and support our new beginning. The woman I had worried about, sacrificed for, and defended to my colleagues and friends was systematically lying to extract money from me to support a criminal boyfriend. She was using the promise of a grandchild as emotional leverage while potentially faking the entire pregnancy. That evening, I sat in my apartment looking at photos from better times. Family barbecues where I had paid for the food, holiday celebrations, where I had bought the gifts, vacation pictures from trips I had funded but couldn't afford to join. In every image, I was smiling and generous while my family enjoyed the fruits of my labor. The pattern was impossible to ignore once I saw it clearly. I had been trained from childhood to believe that my worth was measured by my ability to provide for others. My parents had raised me to be their retirement plan, not their son. Emma had learned to see me as a problem solver who could be manipulated through tears and threats. They had never loved me for who I was. They loved what I could do for them. The realization was devastating and liberating simultaneously. For the first time in my adult life, I could imagine a future where my own needs mattered, where my happiness was a priority, where my money stayed in my own accounts, unless I chose to spend it on things that brought me joy. As I prepared for bed that night, I made a decision that would change everything. My family wanted to disown me for setting boundaries and demanding accountability. Fine. I would make their disownment financially meaningful by removing every dollar of support that had enabled their dysfunction for the past 5 years. They thought they could manipulate me into funding Emma's criminal boyfriend and financing their luxury lifestyle through fraud and emotional abuse. They were about to learn exactly how much their comfort depended on the son they were so eager to cast aside. My response had been okay to their ultimatum. Now it was time to show them what okay really meant. The transformation began at 7 in the morning on Wednesday, exactly 12 hours after my father's disowning text. I called my financial advisor, Thomas Wright, a man whose calm demeanor and ethical approach had guided my investment decisions since I started making serious money. "Cole, you sound different. What's going on?" I explained the situation in clinical terms, focusing on the financial crimes and emotional manipulation rather than the family drama. Thomas listened without judgment, occasionally asking clarifying questions about dollar amounts and timelines. "The first priority is protecting your assets," he said. "If they've committed fraud once, they'll do it again. We need to create financial barriers they can't penetrate." Within 2 hours, I had opened new checking and savings accounts at a different bank, one my family had never heard of. All my direct deposits, automatic investments, and bill payments were transferred to accounts they couldn't access, monitor, or manipulate. I changed every password on every financial platform I used, updating security questions with answers my family would never guess. The old security question about my first pet's name had been Rusty, our family dog. The new one referenced a book I had read in college that none of them knew existed. The emergency fund I kept in my parents' house safe presented a more delicate challenge. $8,000 in cash money I had saved for genuine family crises sat in their fireproof lockbox like a time bomb waiting to fund Emma's next manipulation. I needed that money back, but taking it would require a face-to-face confrontation I wasn't ready for yet. Thursday evening, I drove to their house while they were at Emma's doctor appointment using the garage code that hadn't changed since high school. The safe combination was my parents' anniversary date, a detail that now seemed laughably naive given their willingness to betray our relationship. The $8,000 was still there, along with some family documents and my grandmother's jewelry. I took only the cash that belonged to me, leaving everything else untouched. As I counted the bills, I noticed Emma had left a handwritten note in the safe. "Thanks for always being there when I need help. Love, your grateful sister." The note was dated 3 days ago, clearly written as psychological preparation for her next request for money. Even her gratitude was calculated and strategic. While securing my assets, I also began documenting the full scope of their financial abuse. Every text message they had sent asking for money, every photo of luxury items purchased with my support, every lie they had told about their financial situation was screenshot and saved in multiple locations. I recorded phone conversations legally using an app that complied with Illinois recording laws. Their casual admissions of fraud, their entitled demands for continued support, and their threats to cut me off from future grandchildren would all be useful evidence if legal proceedings became necessary. The most therapeutic part of the process was calculating what my life could become without their financial drain. $4,000 per month invested wisely would allow me to buy a house within 2 years. I could afford to date seriously, maybe even start a family of my own. I could take vacations, buy a reliable car, and build the kind of emergency fund that actually stayed in emergency accounts. For the first time in 5 years, I felt excited about my financial future, instead of burdened by my family's endless needs. My work colleagues began to notice the change in my demeanor. Jennifer Martinez, a fellow analyst who had joined the firm 6 months ago, commented during our lunch break Thursday afternoon. "You seem lighter lately, Cole. Less stressed. Did something good happen?" Jennifer was the kind of woman I would have asked out years ago if I hadn't been so worried about affording a real relationship. She was intelligent, funny, and financially independent, exactly the kind of partner I had always imagined but never felt worthy of pursuing. "I'm making some changes in my personal life," I told her, reassessing priorities and setting better boundaries. She smiled in a way that suggested she understood more than she was saying. "Good for you. Life's too short to let other people's problems become your limitations." Her words hit deeper than she probably intended. I had been limiting my entire adult life to accommodate my family's problems, treating their financial irresponsibility as my obligation rather than their choice. Friday morning brought the systematic dismantling of my family's financial support system. I called Verizon and removed my parents and Emma from my cell phone plan, effective immediately. Their phones would be disconnected by the end of the business day unless they opened their own accounts. The car insurance was next. Richard and Patricia were listed as drivers on my policy, saving them hundreds of dollars per month. I removed them and canceled their coverage, leaving them scrambling to find new insurance before their cars became legally undrivable. I canceled the automatic transfers to their mortgage company, their utility providers, and their credit card accounts. Every financial connection between us was severed with the efficiency of a surgeon removing diseased tissue. The final step was closing the joint savings account Patricia had access to for emergencies. $22,000 money I had saved over 3 years for genuine family crises was transferred to my new account at the secure bank. As I completed each cancellation, I felt a mixture of sadness and relief. Sadness for the family relationship that could have existed if they had treated me with respect and gratitude. Relief that I would never again have to explain to friends why I couldn't afford to join them for dinner or weekend trips. Saturday afternoon, I made a discovery that crystallized the scope of my family's betrayal. While researching Emma's recent social media activity, I found her Facebook Marketplace listings, where she was selling my childhood belongings for drug money. My baseball card collection, carefully maintained since Little League and worth approximately $3,000, had been sold for $400 to someone in Joliet. My vintage Fender guitar, a gift from my grandfather that had taken me 2 years to save up for in high school, was listed for $600 with the description, "Vintage instrument from smoke-free home." Most painfully, my high school letterman jacket from the varsity baseball team was posted with the caption, "Getting rid of my snobby brother's old junk. He won't miss it since he thinks he's too good for us now." Emma wasn't just stealing my money, she was erasing my history and selling my memories to fund her addiction. The jacket represented 4 years of early morning practices, weekend tournaments, and the scholarship opportunities that had helped pay for college. She had reduced it to junk and used it as an opportunity to publicly attack my character. The Facebook comments on her listings were revealing. Several family friends had questioned why she was selling my belongings, but she had responded with a story about me abandoning the family and wanting nothing to do with my past. She was rewriting our history to make me the villain and herself the victim. I screenshot every listing and comment, adding them to my growing file of evidence. If this situation escalated to legal proceedings, Emma's public admissions of theft and her character assassination would strengthen my case considerably. Sunday evening marked exactly 48 hours since my father's disowning text. I sat in my apartment surrounded by bank statements and legal documents, feeling more clarity than I had experienced in years. The fog of family obligation and emotional manipulation had lifted, revealing a landscape of possibilities I had never allowed myself to explore. My phone rang at exactly 9:30, displaying my mother's number. I let it go to voicemail, knowing that the financial reality of losing $4,000 per month had finally penetrated their entitled expectations. The voicemail was 3 minutes of sobbing, begging, and promises that everything could be worked out if I would just come home and talk like a family. Patricia's voice carried genuine panic. For the first time in years, the sound of someone who had just realized that actions have consequences. But I wasn't ready to talk yet. The chess game had only just begun, and my next move would determine whether my family learned to respect my boundaries or lost me forever. The 48 hours they had demanded for me to come to my senses were over. Now it was their turn to face reality. My mother's panicked phone call came at exactly 9:32 Sunday evening, precisely 48 hours after my father's text message. I watched her name flash on my screen, knowing this moment represented the first crack in their entitled facade. The voicemail she left was a masterclass in desperation, disguised as maternal concern. Her voice trembled with genuine fear as she begged me to come home and work this out as a family. For the first time in years, Patricia sounded like she understood that her comfort was not guaranteed. When I returned her call Monday evening, her relief was palpable. "Cole, sweetheart, thank God. Your father and I have been so worried. We know there's been some misunderstanding about money, but we can fix this together." "There's no misunderstanding, Mom. You committed fraud using my identity, and Dad disowned me when I objected. Those are facts, not misunderstandings." Her voice cracked. "Cole, please. We can't make the mortgage payment without your help. The bank is already calling about late fees. Emma's wedding planning has been so stressful, and your father's been having chest pains from all this family tension." The manipulation was textbook Patricia emotional appeals mixed with health scares and financial pressure. But this time her weapons felt dull and ineffective. I'd built immunity to her guilt tactics through weeks of preparation and legal education. "I have conditions for any future relationship," I said, reading from notes Rachel Brooks had helped me prepare. "Full repayment of the $15,000 credit card debt you created in my name, return of my inheritance money with compound interest, which totals $75,000 in today's value. Emma must enter a verified drug rehabilitation program. Marcus must pass background checks and drug testing before any family involvement. All future financial assistance requires written contracts with specific terms. And we all participate in family therapy with a licensed counselor." The silence stretched so long I thought she had hung up. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a different tone, colder and more calculated. "Cole, you're talking like a business negotiator, not a son. Family doesn't work with contracts and conditions. We love each other unconditionally. Unconditional love doesn't include credit card fraud, Mom, and it doesn't include stealing inheritance money or selling my childhood belongings for drug money." "I don't know what you're talking about." "Emma's Facebook Marketplace listings. My baseball cards, my guitar, my Letterman jacket. She's been selling my belongings and calling me a snob for objecting to being robbed by my own family. Patricia's facade cracked completely. She needed money for medical expenses. You weren't answering her calls for help. Medical expenses. Marcus is in jail for selling drugs near an elementary school. Emma needed money to bail out her criminal boyfriend, not for medical care. The conversation deteriorated from there, with Patricia alternating between tears and anger, pleading, and threats. She claimed I was destroying the family and abandoning them in their darkest hour, but couldn't explain why their darkest hour required luxury cars and hot tubs purchased with my stolen credit. Tuesday morning brought a call from Richard, his voice carrying the same hostile tone as his disowning text. "Son, your mother is beside herself with worry. This family conflict is affecting my health, and I need you to stop playing games." "I'm not playing games, Dad. I'm protecting myself from people who think love means fraud is acceptable. Fraud is a strong word for family helping family. We raised you, fed you, clothed you. Everything we did was for your benefit ultimately. Stealing my inheritance was for my benefit. Forging my signature on credit cards was helpful. Selling my belongings for drug money was supportive." Richard's voice rose to the roar I remembered from childhood arguments. "You're talking to your father, not some business associate. Show some respect." "Respect is earned, Dad. And people who commit crimes don't get to demand respect from their victims." I delivered my ultimatum clearly: 7 days to agree to my conditions, or I would pursue all legal remedies available, including criminal charges for fraud and civil suits for financial recovery. The choice was theirs. Wednesday evening brought a group text from Emma, the kind of emotional manipulation she had perfected over the years. "Cole, I know we've had problems, but I'm your sister and I need your help. Marcus made mistakes, but he's trying to change. The baby needs a father, and if you help us now, we can be a real family again." I responded with a single question. "Is there actually a baby, Emma?" Her reply came 3 hours later, after what I imagined was extensive coaching from our parents. "How can you ask me something so cruel? Yes, there's a baby. Your niece or nephew deserves better than an uncle who abandons them before they're even born. But I had done my research. Through the private investigator Rachel had recommended, I learned that Emma had never had a pregnancy test at any medical facility in the Chicago area. Her supposed doctor appointments were actually meetings with Marcus's legal team as they prepared his defense strategy. Thursday brought the most shocking revelation yet. Marcus wasn't just Emma's boyfriend. He was actively recruiting her to sell drugs through her family connections. Phone records subpoenaed by Rachel's legal team showed that Emma had been discussing drug sales with Marcus during his brief periods of freedom between arrests. My sister wasn't just dating a drug dealer, she was becoming one herself, using our family's respectable reputation as cover for criminal activity. The money she needed wasn't for baby clothes or wedding planning. It was to purchase inventory for a drug operation they planned to run from my parents' house. When I confronted Emma with this evidence during a carefully recorded phone conversation, her mask slipped completely. She admitted that Marcus had business opportunities that could help the whole family, and that my financial support would help them get established in a growing market. "Emma, you're talking about selling drugs. That's what this business opportunity is. It's not like selling to kids, Cole. It's helping adults manage pain and stress. There's a real market for what Marcus provides." Marcus was arrested for selling fentanyl near an elementary school. Children could have died from his product. That was a misunderstanding. He was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. The conversation continued for 20 minutes, with Emma revealing the full scope of their criminal plans. They wanted to use my money to establish a drug distribution network, my parents' house as a storage facility, and my clean reputation as a shield against law enforcement suspicion. My family hadn't just betrayed me financially. They were actively trying to involve me in serious federal crimes that could destroy my career and land me in prison. Friday evening brought one final attempt at manipulation. Richard called with news that he had been hospitalized with chest pains and that the doctors were concerned about stress-related heart problems. Patricia took the phone sobbing that the family crisis was literally killing your father. If you don't come home and fix this, Cole, I'm afraid we're going to lose him. And it will be your fault for putting money ahead of family. But Rachel's investigation had already uncovered this tactic. Richard had indeed been to the emergency room, but for anxiety-related symptoms that required no treatment beyond a prescription for mild sedatives. The heart problems were stress responses to losing $4,000 per month in unearned income. Saturday morning marked 1 week since my father's disowning text and the deadline for their response to my conditions. My phone remained silent until late evening, when I received a group text from all three of them. We refuse to negotiate with terrorists. Either you restore all payments and support Emma's family unconditionally, or you're dead to us forever. The text was accompanied by photos of Marcus being released from jail, his bail apparently paid by liquidating some of my parents' possessions. Emma posed next to him outside the Cook County Jail, both of them smiling like they had won a victory instead of committing another crime. But the real shock came in Marcus's own social media post, which Emma had screenshot and included in their group text. Thanks to my girl's family for believing in us. Ready to start our business and take care of my woman and our baby. Family that supports each other stays together. They had used money from my stolen credit card to bail out a drug dealer who was publicly announcing his intention to continue criminal activity. Emma wasn't pregnant, she was his business partner. My parents weren't confused victims. They were willing accomplices to federal crimes. The chess game was over. It was time for the nuclear option. Sunday morning, I called Rachel Brooks and authorized her to file all criminal charges, civil suits, and asset recovery actions we had prepared. By Monday morning, police officers would be serving warrants, and my family would discover that disowning their financial victim doesn't protect them from legal consequences. They wanted me dead to them, fine. Dead men don't pay bills, don't fund criminal enterprises, and don't tolerate fraud from people who claim to love them. My response to their final ultimatum was the same as my response to Richard's disowning text. Okay. But this time they were going to learn exactly what that word meant. Monday morning arrived with the kind of crisp October air that made Chicago beautiful and unforgiving simultaneously. I was reviewing quarterly reports in my office when Rachel Brooks called with news that the wheels of justice had begun turning. Cook County Police executed the search warrant at your parents' house at 6 this morning, she said. They found evidence of the credit card fraud plus some interesting additional materials related to Marcus's drug operation. Detective Maria Santos had taken my case seriously after reviewing the extensive documentation Rachel provided. The evidence of systematic financial fraud combined with Emma's recorded admissions about drug dealing plans had convinced the prosecutor's office that this wasn't a simple family dispute but a pattern of criminal behavior. Your parents are being charged with identity theft, credit card fraud, and conspiracy to distribute controlled substances, Rachel continued. Emma faces additional charges for possession with intent to distribute. They found significant quantities of fentanyl and methamphetamine hidden in your old bedroom's wellness equipment. The irony was devastating. My childhood bedroom, where I had studied for scholarships and dreamed of success, had been converted into a drug storage facility disguised as Emma's recovery space. The expensive exercise equipment purchased with my stolen money had been hollowed out to hide Marcus's inventory. My parents weren't just enablers of Emma's addiction. They were active participants in a drug distribution network that could have poisoned hundreds of people. The hot tub and luxury cars I had discovered weren't purchased for comfort, but as money laundering tools to convert drug profits into legitimate assets. The story hit local news that evening, though the reporters protected my identity as the victim of financial fraud. Channel 7 ran a segment about financial elder abuse in suburban families that featured Detective Santos explaining how adult children often become targets for systematic exploitation. We see cases like this more frequently than people realize, she said during the interview. Family members use emotional manipulation to extract money from successful relatives, often escalating to identity theft and fraud when voluntary payments aren't enough. My phone buzzed with messages from friends and colleagues who recognized enough details to realize I was involved. The support was overwhelming and humbling. People who had wondered why I lived so modestly despite my success finally understood the financial burden I had been carrying. Jennifer Martinez approached me during lunch Tuesday with an expression of genuine concern. Cole, I saw the news about the family financial fraud case. Are you okay? For the first time in years, I felt comfortable discussing my personal situation with someone who might want to date me. It's been difficult, but I'm finally free from people who were using my success against me. I can't imagine how betrayed you must feel. Family is supposed to support your dreams, not steal from them. We talked for 2 hours about the isolation that comes from being exploited by people you love, the guilt of setting boundaries with manipulative relatives, and the challenge of building authentic relationships when your trust has been systematically destroyed. Jennifer's understanding and empathy felt like sunlight after years of emotional winter. For the first time since college, I could imagine a romantic relationship that wasn't limited by my family's financial demands. Wednesday brought news that Marcus had been arrested again, this time for violating his bail conditions by contacting Emma while she was in custody. The drug charges against all 3 of my family members were being prosecuted federally due to the quantities involved and the proximity to schools. Rachel's civil suits were proceeding simultaneously. My parents' house, purchased partly with my stolen inheritance money, was subject to asset forfeiture. The luxury items bought with fraudulent credit cards would be sold to pay restitution. Their comfortable lifestyle, built on my labor and criminal activity, was crumbling with the efficiency of a controlled demolition. The total restitution amount is $347,000, Rachel explained during our Thursday meeting. That includes the original theft compound interest legal fees and damages for emotional distress. The number was staggering but accurate. Years of financial manipulation, inheritance theft, and credit card fraud had cost me nearly half my potential net worth. The money I could have invested, the opportunities I had missed, the relationships I had avoided, all carried quantifiable value that my family would now be forced to repay. Thursday evening brought an unexpected visitor to my apartment. Emma had been released on bail pending trial, and somehow convinced the court that she needed to retrieve personal belongings from my address. When I opened the door, she looked like a different person. Hollow-eyed, desperate, and stripped of the entitled confidence she had worn like armor for years. Cole, please, you have to drop the charges. Mom and Dad could go to prison for 20 years. Is money really worth destroying your own family? Emma, you were planning to sell drugs using my money as startup capital. You turned my childhood bedroom into a distribution center. This isn't about money. It's about federal crimes that could have killed people. She collapsed into sobs that seemed genuine for the first time in years. I know we made mistakes, but Marcus convinced me that everything would be okay if we could just get established. I never meant for anyone to get hurt. What about the pregnancy? Was any of that real? Her silence answered my question. The baby she had used to manipulate my emotions, the grandchild my parents had weaponized against my boundaries, had never existed. It was simply another lie in a campaign of deception designed to extract money from my love and guilt. I thought if I could make you believe in our future together, you'd want to help us succeed, she finally admitted. Marcus said successful families support each other's business ventures. The conversation lasted an hour, with Emma revealing the full scope of their manipulation and my parents' willing participation. They had planned to use my reputation and financial resources to build a drug empire that would make them all wealthy while destroying communities with poison. By Friday, the legal machinery was moving with unstoppable momentum. My parents had hired criminal defense attorneys who were already discussing plea bargains to avoid lengthy prison sentences. The house would be sold, the luxury items auctioned, and the proceeds applied to restitution and legal fees. Emma's defense lawyer had contacted Rachel about a cooperation agreement where she would testify against Marcus and her suppliers in exchange for reduced charges. The drug network I had unknowingly been funding was larger than anyone initially suspected, involving suppliers from Mexico and distribution routes throughout the Midwest. Weekend brought a flood of contact attempts from extended family members who had heard about the arrests. Aunts and uncles who had rarely spoken to me suddenly wanted to mediate and restore family harmony. Their messages followed a predictable pattern shock at the charges, claims that family problems should be resolved privately, and suggestions that I was overreacting to what they characterized as mistakes rather than crimes. But I had learned to recognize manipulation in all its forms. These relatives weren't concerned about justice or my well-being. They were worried that the criminal charges would expose their own financial relationships with Richard and Patricia. Several of them had borrowed money from my parents over the years, money that had originally come from my monthly payments. The most revealing contact came from my father's brother, Uncle Kevin, who called Saturday evening with an offer to mediate a family solution that works for everyone. Cole, your parents made some poor choices, but prison won't solve anything. Maybe we can work out a payment plan where they compensate you over time while staying out of jail. Uncle Kevin, they committed federal drug crimes. The justice system doesn't offer payment plans for fentanyl distribution. But you could ask the prosecutor to consider family circumstances. Emma's just a confused young woman who got involved with the wrong man. His suggestion revealed how little my extended family understood the situation. Emma wasn't a victim who had been misled. She was an active participant who had helped plan and execute crimes that could have killed children. Marcus hadn't corrupted an innocent woman. He had found a willing partner with family connections to legitimate income. Sunday evening brought the final piece of shocking news. Rachel's investigator had discovered that I wasn't Richard's only victim. My father had abandoned 2 children from a previous marriage 30 years ago, never paying court-ordered child support despite having the financial means through my assistance. Your half-siblings have been looking for Richard for decades, Rachel explained. He owes over $100,000 in back child support, plus interest and penalties. They're adults now, with families of their own, who were affected by his abandonment. The pattern was undeniable. Richard's exploitation of my financial success wasn't an aberration caused by desperation. It was his standard operating procedure for dealing with family obligations. He had used me the same way he had used his previous children's mother as a financial resource to be drained and discarded when convenient. My half-sister Angela called me directly Sunday night, having obtained my number through the court proceedings. Her voice carried a mixture of sadness and vindication as she explained their childhood poverty while Richard lived comfortably with his new family. We always wondered how he could afford to ignore his court obligations while living so well, she said. Now we understand that he was using your money to fund his lifestyle while we went without basic necessities. The conversation with Angela was both heartbreaking and healing. She and our half-brother David had built successful lives despite Richard's abandonment, but they had never stopped wondering why their father had chosen comfort over responsibility. "I'm sorry you went through what we experienced," Angela said before hanging up. "But I'm proud that you had the courage to stop enabling his behavior. Someone needed to hold him accountable." As I prepared for bed Sunday night, I felt a profound sense of completion. The legal system was delivering justice, my assets were protected, and I was finally free to build the life I had always deserved. The people who had raised me to value family loyalty had taught me the most important lesson of all: real family doesn't require you to sacrifice your dignity, your financial security, or your future happiness. They had disowned me for setting boundaries and demanding honesty. In return, I had given them the freedom to face the consequences of their choices without my continued enablement. Tomorrow would begin the next chapter of my life, one where my success would benefit me and people who genuinely loved me, rather than criminals who saw my kindness as weakness to exploit. The reckoning was complete, and for the first time in years, I could sleep peacefully, knowing that my money was safe and my conscience was clear. 6 months after my father's text message changed everything. I stood in the kitchen of my new house in Lincoln Park watching the sun rise through windows that belonged to me. The 3-bedroom Craftsman home had cost $450,000, purchased with money that would have been impossible to save while funding my family's criminal enterprise. The legal proceedings had concluded with plea bargains that satisfied justice while acknowledging the complexity of family relationships. Richard received 5 years in federal prison for financial fraud and drug conspiracy charges. Patricia was sentenced to 3 years probation and 2,000 hours of community service required to counsel other families about financial abuse. Emma entered a court-mandated rehabilitation program followed by 2 years probation, her cooperation against Marcus and his suppliers, earning her consideration from the judge. Marcus received 15 years for drug trafficking, his repeat offenses, and proximity to schools, eliminating any possibility of mercy. The federal prosecutor had called his operation a community poison distribution network that used family manipulation to fund the destruction of children's lives. The restitution process had been more thorough than I had dared hope. The sale of my parents' house, their luxury vehicles, and the expensive items purchased with stolen money had generated $392,000 after legal fees. Combined with the recovery of my inheritance money from property liens, I received $467,000 in total compensation. But the financial recovery was less important than the emotional freedom it represented. For the first time since college graduation, my bank account reflected my actual earnings rather than my family's needs. The monthly transfers that had limited my life for 5 years were replaced by investments, savings, and occasional indulgences I had never allowed myself. Jennifer and I had been dating seriously for 4 months, our relationship built on honesty and mutual respect rather than financial convenience. She had seen me at my lowest point during the legal proceedings and chose to support my healing rather than judge my family's crimes. "You're a completely different person than when we first met," she told me over dinner at a restaurant I could finally afford, without calculating how the cost would affect my family obligations. "More relaxed, more confident, like you're actually living your own life instead of managing everyone else's problems." Our relationship represented everything my family's manipulation had prevented me from experiencing. Jennifer appreciated my financial responsibility without exploiting it, supported my career ambitions without demanding personal benefit, and offered emotional intimacy without attached strings of obligation or guilt. The most unexpected healing came through my relationship with my half-siblings, Angela and David. We met in person 2 months after the arrests initially to coordinate our civil claims against Richard, but gradually developing the authentic family bond I had always thought I had with Emma. Angela was a nurse in Indianapolis with 2 teenage daughters who had grown up hearing stories about their grandfather who chose money over family. David worked as a high school mathematics teacher in Milwaukee, channeling his experience with financial abandonment into helping underprivileged students understand the connection between education and economic security. Richard taught us that family means nothing without integrity, David said during one of our monthly phone calls. "You proved that lesson by refusing to enable his crimes. We're proud to call you our brother." Their respect and affection felt completely different from my previous family relationships because it wasn't conditional on my ability to solve their problems or fund their dreams. They loved me for my character rather than my paycheck, a distinction that had taken me years to understand. The criminal trials had attracted media attention that brought unexpected opportunities for advocacy work. Detective Maria Santos connected me with organizations focused on financial elder abuse education, where my story helped other victims recognize manipulation tactics and legal remedies. Speaking at community centers and financial literacy workshops, I met dozens of people who had been systematically exploited by family members using love as a weapon for economic extraction, adult children who funded their parents' gambling addictions, siblings who enabled brothers and sisters to avoid employment spouses who tolerated financial infidelity disguised as family loyalty. The hardest part isn't the money one woman told me after a presentation in Evanston. It's accepting that people who claim to love you are actually using your love against you. How do you trust anyone after that? Her question captured the deepest wound my family had inflicted. Beyond the financial theft and legal complications, they had corrupted my understanding of love itself, teaching me that affection was earned through payments and maintained through continued financial compliance. Therapy with Dr. Rebecca Chen, a specialist in family trauma and financial abuse, helped me rebuild my emotional framework around healthier definitions of relationship and responsibility. Through weekly sessions, I learned to distinguish between love and manipulation, support and enabling family loyalty, and personal destruction. Your parents trained you from childhood to believe that your worth was measured by your usefulness to them, Dr. Chen explained during one particularly breakthrough session. Recovery means learning that you deserve love for who you are, not what you can provide. The process was challenging because it required grieving the family I had thought I had while celebrating the freedom to build the family I actually wanted. Jennifer Angela David and the close friends who had supported me through the crisis became my chosen family relationships based on mutual respect rather than financial dependency. Emma's rehabilitation journey provided the most complex emotional challenge. Her letters from the treatment facility were filled with genuine remorse and detailed accounts of how Marcus had manipulated her addiction to recruit her into criminal activity. The sister I had tried to save was gradually emerging from the addict who had helped steal my future. I know I can never repay the money or undo the lies, she wrote in a letter that arrived on my birthday. But I want you to know that your refusal to enable my addiction probably saved my life. Marcus was planning to use me until I overdosed or got arrested, then move on to the next vulnerable woman. You forced me to choose between crime and recovery. Her progress reports from the facility were encouraging but realistic. Addiction recovery was a lifelong process, and rebuilding trust would take years of consistent action rather than words. I remained open to eventual reconciliation, but committed to maintaining boundaries that protected my well-being regardless of her choices. The most profound changes were the ones only I could see. My modest apartment was replaced by a beautiful home with space for hosting dinner parties and holiday celebrations. My unreliable Honda Civic gave way to a certified pre-owned BMW that started every morning without prayer or anxiety. But the material improvements were symptoms of a deeper transformation. I was finally living as a successful professional, rather than a successful professional who funded other people's failures. My money stayed in my accounts unless I chose to spend it on things that brought me joy, security, or meaningful connection. Dating Jennifer had taught me what healthy relationships looked like when they weren't contaminated by financial manipulation. We split expenses, equitably supported each other's goals without demanding sacrifice, and built trust through consistency rather than transactions. 6 months after my father's disowning text, Jennifer and I were planning a vacation to Ireland, something I had dreamed about for years but never allowed myself to afford. The trip would cost $4,000 per person, exactly the amount I used to transfer to my parents every month. It's funny how spending money on experiences you actually want feels completely different from spending it on other people's problems, Jennifer observed as we booked our flights. You look excited instead of stressed. Her observation captured the essence of my transformation. For 5 years, every financial decision had been shadowed by my family's needs and demands, turning money from a tool for building happiness into a source of anxiety and limitation. Now my income reflected my values and dreams rather than other people's manipulation and entitlement. The legal victory had provided justice, but the personal victory was freedom. Freedom from guilt-based manipulation, freedom from financial exploitation, and freedom to define family as people who supported my growth rather than people who demanded my diminishment. Standing in my kitchen that morning, I thought about the text message that had changed everything. My father's attempt to disown me for setting boundaries had actually liberated me from people who viewed my love as a resource to be strip-mined until exhaustion. His cruel words, "I disown you," talk to my lawyer, had freed me to discover what my life could become when it belonged entirely to me. My response of "okay" had been the first word of my real adulthood the moment I stopped being their financial victim and started being my own financial victor. The sunrise streaming through my windows illuminated a kitchen where I would host Angela's daughters for Thanksgiving, where Jennifer and I would plan our future together, where friends would gather to celebrate achievements and support each other through challenges. Real family, I had learned, wasn't defined by shared DNA or childhood history, but by shared values and mutual respect. The people who truly loved me wanted me to succeed independently rather than sacrifice endlessly for their comfort. My father had threatened to disown me as punishment for demanding honesty and accountability. Instead, he had given me permission to disown a relationship built on exploitation and discover relationships built on genuine affection. The greatest gift my family had ever given me was their final ultimatum, because it forced me to choose between enabling their destruction and building my own happiness. Choosing myself hadn't made me selfish, it had made me whole. As I prepared for another day at a job I loved in a home I owned, planning a future with someone who supported my dreams, I felt grateful for every difficult lesson that had led to this morning. My family had taught me that love without boundaries becomes enablement, that generosity without accountability becomes exploitation, and that saying no to immediate demands sometimes means saying yes to long-term healing. They had also taught me that true family support means helping people become self-sufficient rather than creating dependencies, that real love sometimes requires difficult conversations instead of comfortable lies, and that protecting yourself from manipulation isn't abandonment but survival. The deepest lesson was that authentic relationships are built on mutual growth rather than one-sided sacrifice. The best way to love someone is to encourage their independence, celebrate their achievements, and respect their boundaries, rather than exploiting their kindness or demanding their diminishment. Have you ever had to choose between enabling someone you love and protecting your own future? How did you find the courage to set boundaries with family members who used guilt and obligation to control your choices? Share your story in the comments below, and let others know they're not alone in struggling with these difficult decisions. If this story resonated with your experience, please like this video to help other people find it when they need to hear that setting boundaries isn't selfish. Subscribe to stay connected with stories about overcoming family manipulation and building authentic relationships. And share this with someone who might need to hear that their financial success doesn't obligate them to fund other people's failures. Thank you for listening to my story and supporting others who are learning to love themselves enough to demand respect from the people who claim to love them. Remember that you deserve relationships that celebrate your growth rather than exploit your generosity, and that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable someone's destructive choices. Your life belongs to you, and protecting it from people who would steal your future isn't betrayal. It's wisdom, courage, and the foundation for building the family and happiness you actually deserve.